It is a prison like few others in America. Its recreation yards are mostly empty, its corridors silent. 1,400 adult male offenders live here, confined to their cells 23 hours a day.
The inmate population cannot go anywhere or do anything unless they're escorted by staff. They can't go to medical, they can't go to yard, they can't use a phone.
We had 2 prison riots. They burnt most of the prison down in '73. In 1985, we had another riot. It was quite bloody for staff, and we had a lot of staff injured. After that riot, we went to 23-hour-a-day lockdown just to keep a lid on the place.
The state of siege has been in effect since 1985.
It's a deterrent for inmates that are at other camps that have a lot better situation, and they know if they mess up bad enough, this is where they'll come, and this is not where they want to come.
State Penitentiary, McAlester, Oklahoma.
We're the only institution in the state of Oklahoma with a 23-hour lockdown, so it's uncommon. It's not a normal practice here in the state.
Although the highest security measures are in place here, the daily monotony can give way to danger and death without warning.
It's very dangerous. Reality's around the corner all the time. When you come through the main control, you need to know where you are at all times. You need to know what you're facing, what you're up against.
Stabbing, strangulations, just about any kind of way you can kill someone. I've seen it.
I've seen a lot of people killed in here. Most of them asked for it.
It is a very dangerous place to live because you group with some of the most deadliest criminals in our society.
The deadliest criminals in our society. Oklahoma State Penitentiary has seen its share since it opened nearly 100 years ago. At the turn of the 20th century, Oklahoma was still a territory and had no prison of its own. Its convicted felons were sent away to the Kansas State Penitentiary at a cost of 25 cents a day. By 1908, the state of Oklahoma had made plans to build its own prison on a parcel of land 90 miles south of Tulsa, a site once occupied by the Choctaw Indian Nation. Once ground had been broken, the state began moving its prisoners back from Kansas.
They sent a boxcar up with bars welded on the windows, brought the inmates back here. They were offloaded. The inmates were held here, and they actually built the original prison themselves.
Construction began with a massive wall built of concrete and steel that would enclose the 40-acre compound. Barbed wire and six-shooters were all that kept these early convict workers here. Miraculously, there were no escapes. During these early days, the prison itself was expected to provide inmates and staff with a substantial part of their diet. Beef cattle and chickens were among the livestock raised here to provide food to the penitentiary's kitchen. A small farming operation has survived to the present day, manned by trusty inmates who live outside the penitentiary walls. Among the first structures to be built inside the wall was the East Cell Block, completed in 1909. Although it is deserted today, it was designed to accommodate 100 men. By 1935, it held double that number. The prisoners were crowded into the dungeon-like jail cells whose walls and floors were made of solid steel. The dark cells were tiny and poorly ventilated. Inmates likened them to ice boxes in the winter and ovens in the summer. But their most important feature was that they were considered escape-proof. By modern prison standards, the East Wing is unfit even for the worst convicted felons. The cells have been empty since 1984, when a federal court found their use to be unconstitutional. As construction progressed beyond the first cell block, the prison took on its distinct shape. A central hub called the Rotunda connected cell blocks, industries, and offices which radiated out like spokes on a wheel.
This is on the original design, and this is the old Rotunda. And all movement in or out will go through this area. This is the east entrance to the cell house. Cell house is the oldest part of the institution that we have left that we actually utilize. This is the entrance exit of the Rotunda. This will take you out to the main yard of the facility. This is the captain's office. What we have here is a metal detector, which we utilize to help control contraband.
Even today, when no more than a handful of inmates are allowed out of their cells at the same time, the Rotunda remains the key to controlling the prison.
The officer that is assigned to this post operates all the doors in the Rotunda, will control all movement and activity of the Rotunda. You will not be able to leave the Rotunda or come into the Rotunda without this officer operating the doors. So the officer in here is in total control. Nothing can happen without this officer doing it.
The paintings that hang on the Rotunda walls open another window to the prison's history. They are the work of one of Oklahoma's most notorious inmates, a German immigrant named Conrad Mass.
He was known as the Mad Artist. He painted numerous paintings, some been sold out on the street. We have 4 that are still here in the Rotunda area.
Mass arrived at the prison in 1920 with a life sentence for murder. He killed his wife with a shotgun, reportedly because she nagged him to move back home to Germany. The guards allowed Mass to set up a studio in an unused barn and paint on canvas taken from the prison's mattress factory. The paintings are also a backdrop for one of the prison's grimmest features.
The catwalk you see above, our gun run, we had armed correctional officers up there at that time. They were called guards. They were armed. The reason for the black lines on the floor that you see is we weren't locked down. We would move one floor of a cell house at a time out the back door to a mess hall. The inmates were required to stay within the black lines.
Historically, inmates who stepped out of line were said to be in the kill zone, which means they could be shot at without warning. Bullet holes in the paintings confirm that, over the years, Oklahoma's guards have not been afraid to pull the trigger. But it is brutality among the inmates themselves that has helped to cement Oklahoma State Penitentiary's reputation as one of the most dangerous prisons in America.
When these doors slammed on me the first night, I was scared. I'm not gonna lie to you, but I was ready. In other words, my motto was kill or be killed.
Unit 9, Battle 2 gas is secure.
Hey, bitch. Jay, what do you say?
This is going to sound corny, but I think if a man, woman comes in and does their job every day, and we have no major incidents, and nobody gets hurt, and we all go home, I think that's an act of heroism every day.
All right, listen up. It's been pretty quiet since we left. Last night on the 10 to 6 shift, inmate Marvin down on H unit had his window covered up. And they had to go down and talk to him. And after Captain Psaki did, he complied and uncovered the window without an incident. And then later on, still on the 10 to 6, inmate on H unit, he was down there banging his head against the wall in the cell. So they had to go down and get him, and he's now at the infirmary for observation. The 6 to 2 shift has been quiet. The only thing that's happened there is 6 Tower.
Captain Curtis Hood commands 105 officers who work the 2 to 10 p.m. shift at Oklahoma State Penitentiary.
Okay.
Their primary goal is to maintain safety and order. It is not an easy task.
You're going to have violence, inmate violence, witness stabbings, carried out injured inmates. Some of them have died. Some of the inmates that we've carried out on stretchers have been dead. You need to accept it. You need to be ready to deal with it if you're going to be here. You guys just remember where you're at and who you're dealing with and what you're up against every day. Pay attention.
I've seen 2 homicides, or the after effects of homicides that have just happened. They were pretty gruesome. The last homicide I saw, another inmate took his TV set and hit the other victim in the head with it, and crushed his head, and he kicked him in the throat, and that was pretty gruesome. But you just got to do your job and go on.
It's male inmates, male officers. These guys are big, they're strong. The officers we have are big and strong. Now, being a female, I'm not big, but by the way you carry yourself, your actions here, working here, that speaks a lot for yourself. Not only do you gain the respect of the men, but you gain the respect of the inmates also.
Watch out for anything. Do not underestimate anybody. Pay attention to detail. Follow your post orders. Take care of each other. Okay, you guys be careful and go to work.
Oklahoma's modern corrections officers carry on a legacy that began before the prison's wall, cell blocks, and rotunda had even been completed. Those early guards were expected to work 12-hour shifts 7 days a week. Their salary was $60 a month. Progressive state laws dictated that they render fair and humane treatment to the inmates. As early as 1910, Oklahoma's legislature had made cruelty to convicts a punishable crime. There were also penalties for any guard who was caught annoying a prisoner. Today, any use of force on an inmate is planned in advance and carried out in the safest possible manner. The job falls to the Correction Emergency Response Team, known as CERT.
There are emergency officers that have special training and different types of tactics to approach what kind of incident we have, whether it's a hostage, escape, riot, whatever.
Every use of force at the prison is videotaped, as evidence that no cruelty is involved.
Say, for instance, if an inmate is refusing to lock down or refusing to come out of his cell, say him and his cell partner got in a fight and he's injured his cell partner, we'll go up there and want to remove him out of the cell, and the inmate that's being disruptive refuses to cuff up and obey the order, then we'll get a response team to come in, and they'll come in full riot gear and go in and get the inmate.
In this instance, a 55-year-old inmate is locked in a shower stall. He has ignored a routine request to place his hands through the bars in order to be handcuffed. Most inmates at Oklahoma State Penitentiary are led to and from their cells in this manner.
That's what he keeps asking. Mr. Fisher, I want you to put out your hand for restraints. You refusing?
I'm not refusing.
Put out your hand for restraints.
I'm not going in restraints.
The procedure is called a cell extraction. The CERT team enters with each officer assigned a specific position, one officer for each arm, one for each leg.
let's just put him in his regular restraints first. Let's go.
All right.
I want him cuffed behind his back.
The disruptive inmate is serving 35 years for arson and a crime called defrauding an innkeeper. After the inmate is returned to his cell, a medic checks him for injury.
He's got a small laceration on his lower right arm. That's damage from Oaks trying to trick me. Probably that looks like a center.
Grab my hand, put my feet over it.
Got a small laceration here.
Come here, Deputy, when I want to talk to you.
Yes, sir.
I am Jesus Christ.
Such treatment may seem harsh given the inmate's apparent poor mental health and non-combative behavior.
He's sick of mine, so I can help him.
But the prison no longer takes chances. It has endured a long and brutal history of inmate escape and violence that began in 1914. That year, 7 people were killed when a group of inmates stole a gun and staged the first breakout from behind the prison's wall. 27 years later came the day remembered in Oklahoma as Bloody Sunday.
There was an escape in 1941. They got outside the east gate. They had the warden and a deputy hostage. They got a hold of a vehicle that belonged to a staff member outside the east gate. Turned into a shootout, and several people were killed, including the warden and the deputy.
The warden was Jess Dunn, the only warden ever slain in the line of duty at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. It was a tragic moment in the prison's history. It was also an omen of events that would one day bring the institution to the brink of destruction.
People running around bloody from the fights and the beatings and stabbings, the rapes and all that. It was a madhouse. It was like the end of the world.
In its first 65 years, Oklahoma State Penitentiary had survived bloody escape attempts and the murder of its warden. But in 1973, the aging institution would face the greatest challenge in its history.
We had had rumors going around for about 6 months that there was going to be a riot. We have what they call informants, and the informants was telling the administration there's going to be a riot.
Among the grievances driving inmates to desperation were poor food, inadequate health care, and allegations of racial discrimination. The prison was also severely overcrowded. It had a capacity of 1,100 inmates, but that summer, more than 2,000 men were crowded into its dark, foreboding jail cells. Oklahoma State Penitentiary was also understaffed. Guards were quitting their jobs at rates approaching 10% each month. As a result, inmates were often given duties normally reserved for the staff.
The inmates ran this prison. They pretty much controlled the business and what went on. There was officers there to supervise, but like the cell house here, the East Cell House, you'd have an officer to supervise, but an inmate controlled the keys.
Then came the breaking point. July 27, 1973, 2:30 p.m. Jim Sorrells vividly remembers the scene as he looked down from the gunwalk above the rotunda.
We saw a bunch of convicts just milling around, and some of them had weapons, what we call shank, homemade knives.
I'm standing here looking, and I see that they have stabbed Captain C.C. Smith in the face with a screwdriver.
2 officers were taken hostage, a lieutenant and a sergeant, and was taken down on the unit, and from there it just escalated. They got control of the unit.
At 2:45 p.m., inmates in the yard were addressed by the ringleaders over the public address system. "We have taken over. We've got weapons. We've got hostages. It's a revolution. Come and help us." Deputy Sheriff J.W. Young was then a prison guard. He carried the first wounded officers to the infirmary.
while in the infirmary, the tower guard on 7 Tower called inside and said, "You need to tell that guard to come up here and help me because they're starting to burn the penitentiary down."
6 p.m. 21 guards had been taken hostage. Others were beaten and bloody. By 6:20, the hospital was burning. At 7:30, the canteen was torched. Dark clouds of smoke rose from behind the walls, adding to the chaos. Charred inmate records floated out of a burning office building.
And before the power went out, before the fire finally got to the power and cut it off, I had called the administrative building and told them what was going on out here on the yard and asked if we could use deadly force to stop it, and it was told no, we could not.
I came down through here, kneeled down on the ground over here. They were trying to burn the tower out here. They were throwing Molotov cocktails off the top of the building up here. Well, I was shooting them in the air as they was coming by, lighting up the sky. And J.W. Young had talked to me. He was up on this tower, and it was getting so hot that he was going to have to move out. They was burning him out. The windows was already starting to collapse on it.
There was convicts all over the place. Everybody had a knife. I had a double-headed axe, fireman's axe.
As night fell, some inmates began to attack each other over personal vendettas using screwdrivers, hammers, and homemade knives. 3 inmates were stabbed to death in the smoky darkness.
But it was the end of the world, and some that weren't dead were laying there faking dead, and some that were dead laying there, and you had to step over the bodies.
The standoff continued all night, but by morning, National Guard troops had surrounded the prison and were poised to strike. At 8 a.m., inmates began dropping their weapons and releasing hostages. By noon, they were assured that their grievances would be addressed. The remaining hostages were set free. The entire prison was placed in lockdown. For 6 months, the inmates were let out of their cells only for showers.
First they had us 3 to a cell with no mattresses, no nothing. And then they put a 2 to a cell and brought us a mattress. Fed us sandwiches twice a day. Some fat people got skinny.
The need for a lockdown was clear to anyone who stood on the prison yard in the days and months following the 1973 riot. The prison was paralyzed. There was no electricity, and there were simply few places left standing in which inmates could be controlled. 24 buildings, including inmate living space, industry, and educational facilities, had been gutted and had to be demolished. Over the next 5 years, the prison was rebuilt. Freestanding cell houses like the isolation unit nicknamed The Rock were added to ease the crowding. Slowly, inmate life returned to its regular routine.
They had programs, different things went on. They had arts and crafts and things like that. And an open yard versus a closed yard is that means the inmate has time out of his cell to walk the yard and exercise out on the yard and things like that.
But in December of 1985, inmates again tried to take control of the prison, this time in the F cell house. 5 guards were taken hostage. 3 were seriously wounded. It took 3 hours to quell the uprising.
And after that riot, the warden at that time decided that the only way to control this prison was to lock it down, and it's been locked down ever since.
Today, Oklahoma State Penitentiary is eerily quiet and seemingly empty. The rotunda, once the main hub of the crowded prison, is deserted. A few inmates have an easy job keeping the floors spotless because there is little foot traffic. Cafeteria food is hand-delivered to each cell since inmates are no longer permitted to walk to the mess hall. In the rare instance that an inmate is allowed out of his cell, he is flanked by guards at all times.
We never moved an inmate unless we had officers on them. They couldn't go anywhere. We shook them down every time they said boo. And we wanted to set this institution up as a preventive for any type of deviant behavior at the other institutions, because we didn't want to come to Oklahoma State Penitentiary.
Inmate Alexander, you have a right to remain silent. However, adverse inferences may be drawn from your silence. Anything you say can will be used against you in this proceeding and in a court of law. Do you understand each of the rights I've explained to you?
Yeah.
You may stop talking.
Calvin Alexander is serving 25 years for attempted robbery and escape. He is one of a select few inmates who are allowed to volunteer to help the staff train for disciplinary hearings.
Or affirm the test. Inmate Alexander, you've been found guilty of this offense. The evidence relied on for the finding guilt's Officer Meek's statement that you assaulted inmate in the kitchen. Also,
for Alexander, this practice session of inmate court is a welcome break in the monotony. At this moment, almost all of Oklahoma State Penitentiary's 1,500 other inmates are locked in their cells. They live in a collection of cell houses that reflect how attitudes toward building prisons changed through the course of the 20th century. F Cell House is the oldest still in use. Its steel bars and long corridors date from 1937, when the prison's first major expansion was motivated by overcrowding.
Lockdown time is pretty much lockdown time. You're in your cell with your cell partner. I just sit in the cell, watch my TV, you know, and listen to my radio. Hope we get yard. We shower 3 times a week.
Housing Unit A was completed in 1983. Its solid doors recall a time when privacy and quiet were thought to be beneficial to inmate rehabilitation. By contrast, Unit H is partially buried underground inside its own security fence. Its hardened cells are windowless. Each automatic door is more than 3 inches thick. It was opened in 1991 to address the needs of lockdown. While Unit H houses the most dangerous inmates, all of Oklahoma State Penitentiary's cell blocks have been in a state of high alert since the riot of 1985.
23-hour lockdown, they get an hour exercise 5 days a week. They get showers 3 times a week. They look forward to any visit they may have.
23-hour lockdown gives the inmates a whole lot of time to think of something else they can do to get to us.
I don't think they would totally ever open it back up, because they're more scared of their life. They're scared for their lives as well. You know, this way they have somewhat of control over the prison setting for their safety, not for a convict's safety, but for their safety, because people still die in prison.
Punishment imposed: 30 days DU, 180 loss of earned credits, and 45 days loss of canteen privileges.
It's not really a deterrent. It kind of depends on the individual. For me, it wouldn't be, because the next time a person disrespect me or get out of line, then I got to stand up for myself, because respect is the #1 key in this environment.
In spite of the hard-line control and sense of order imposed here, violence remains a way of life, even among cellmates.
Most people that get killed nowadays, is their cellie does it, because it's the only person can get to anybody is your cellie. You know, there ain't no real excitement. They just come down and lock one up and bury the other one.
I've seen stabbings, I've seen raping, I've seen extortion. I mean, people living. You know, predators and prey, strong survive, the weak surrender. And that's how this thing operates.
Me and another guy was involved in an altercation where we beat another inmate to death with a piece of pipe.
Kenny Funkhauser has 3 consecutive 50-year sentences for armed robbery, plus a life sentence for first-degree murder.
I was strung out on dope and ended up robbing an adult bookstore, and the guy tried to take the gun and I ended up killing him.
Some of them don't like it at all. They feel like they're just a caged animal and they're nothing for them. And like I tell them, your behavior got here, your behavior's gonna get you out of here.
Sometimes the right plan can also lead a desperate inmate out, if only for a short time. While Oklahoma State Penitentiary's escape history stretches back to 1914, the prison continues to record breakouts in the modern era. One of the most recent was staged in 1993 by 2 brothers who were cellmates. Homer Jones was serving 200 years plus life for robbery, rape, and first-degree murder. His brother, Johnny Jones Jr., had 220 years for robbery, rape, murder, and sodomy. Early on the morning of May 4th, the Jones brothers pried the bars of their cell windows apart. Then they scaled a fence topped with razor wire using a homemade rope. Next, they cut through a second fence and simply walked away.
2 escapees, okay? Here you go.
Authorities blocked roads and searched vehicles. A chase team from the nearby McAlford Correctional Center was dispatched with bloodhounds to search the woods and surrounding neighborhoods. The next morning, the 2 men were cornered in a stolen car and returned to Oklahoma State Penitentiary. The brothers already had 2 life sentences, plus 420 years to serve between them. Upon their return, Homer Jones got an extra 20 years. Johnny got 28.
You understand?
Yes, I do.
You have any questions, Staff Rep?
No, I don't.
Nope. Let's conclude the disciplinary hearing 8/15/01 at approximately 10:28 a.m.
I don't really think the outside world wants to see. They get upset when they hear some of the bad things that go on inside these walls, but they don't see too much. This is a place where the bad men are kept, and as long as they're there, they're out of our neighborhoods.
But every September, the so-called bad men trade their prison uniforms for cowboy hats and boots, and the public is treated to a sugar-coated glimpse of life inside Oklahoma's highest security prison. It is the one time the prison's 12,000-seat rodeo arena is in use. For a select few inmates, it is a welcome relief from the endless days of lockdown.
Well, it's been going on for about 65 years. Convicts been participating in it. 10 convicts from every joint get to come, and the first 3, there's trophies. You get $15 for 3rd place on a ride of the night. Second's $25, first is $35, and you just do it for bragging rights.
The annual rodeo began in 1941 when the arena was built. Inmates from prisons all over Oklahoma volunteered to take on some extra punishment as a way to raise money for recreational equipment. Additional proceeds were donated to charity.
It's been a continuous event except for 3 years during World War II and for a year right after the 1973 riot.
Typically, less than 100 of Oklahoma State Prison's 1,500 inmates earn the privilege of competing in the rodeo. They call themselves the Team from McAlester, after the city where the prison is located, and are allowed to spend their recreation time training for the event. Dan Lyles has been here since 1986. He was convicted of first-degree murder.
It was the challenge, you know, it's the one time in prison where you don't mind being in prison.
Inmate Robert Henderson has served 3 years on a 10-year sentence.
Larceny of auto, 2 counts of NOLA concealing, 1 escape charge, 1 first-degree burglary charge.
When Rodeo Day comes, the most popular feature among inmates has always been the event called Money the Hard Way, in which inmates compete for a bag containing $100 tied between the horns of a raging Brahma bull.
I've won, you know, the team for McAlester, and I finished second in both the bronc riding and the bull riding. You know, I like Money the Hard Way. The whole thing is just, it's fun.
What the crowds don't see from the grandstands is real prison life. From the nearly 1,500 men confined to their cells in an endless lockdown, to the time-honored tradition of putting men to death. For almost 90 years, Oklahoma State Penitentiary has been charged with the duty of carrying out the state's executions, performing as many as 13 in the year 2000 using the current method, lethal injection.
This is business as usual. You know, we have a job to do, and it's a necessary job.
The job began when the prison installed the electric chair in 1915. Charlie Young would be among the first to die. He was executed along with 3 other murderers on the same April day in 1917. John Prather would be next in 1918. A convicted murderer, Prather died in the chair at the age of 25. During the next 50 years, 82 men were electrocuted in the device nicknamed Old Sparky by prison staff. The executioner for most of them was a man known as Oklahoma's most prolific killer. For over 32 years, Rich Owens pulled the switch on 65 condemned men, including Hiram Prather, the inmate sentenced to die for the murder of Warden Jess Dunn on Bloody Sunday in 1941.
I remember when they would do that the lights would dim. You've heard these stories about how the lights would dim. The lights would dim inside this prison.
In 1977, Oklahoma joined Texas as the first 2 states to adopt lethal injection as their mode of execution. Today, Oklahoma's death chamber is housed in the high-security H Unit a few yards from death row. Although the lethal drugs used here are considered a more humane method of killing a condemned inmate, they are seldom administered without protest and controversy. In 1995, Thomas Grasso became the 4th man to be led to Oklahoma's lethal injection gurney. By all accounts, Grasso was a cold-blooded killer. In 1990, he strangled an 87-year-old Tulsa, Oklahoma woman. A year later, he killed an 81-year-old woman in a boarding house in Staten Island, New York. After pleading guilty to both crimes, Grasso stated that he would prefer to die rather than spend the rest of his life in jail. At the time, capital punishment was outlawed in New York. Grasso requested that he be sent to Oklahoma to face the death penalty there. He arrived in 1992. Controversy erupted when Grasso instructed his Oklahoma public defender to offer the court no evidence that might spare his life. Then, Grasso asked to waive his rights to a mandatory appeal, a process that generally means 12 or more years on death row. In March of 1995, he got his wish. As protesters demonstrated against the death penalty outside Oklahoma State Penitentiary, Thomas Grasso was executed by lethal injection just 3 years after he arrived at the prison. Since that time, the tedious atmosphere inside Oklahoma State Prison has remained relatively stable. For staff and inmates alike, the years of lockdown have produced an atmosphere of quiet resignation.
I'm captive, you know. I've lost my freedom, and you know, and I put myself here.
I can't see the lockdown ever being lifted. It's a way to control it. It protects inmate lives, it protects staff lives, so I can't see it ever going.
Time doesn't hurt you anymore. After you do 30 years or so, you can do that time. You don't hurt. It's just like you're going home. Like you're going home when you close that door, you're at home. You want to get outside, but that's a distant thought when you got a life sentence. And it's got to be that way or you can't do time.